Hello. Yeah, that was just incredible watching what Oregon does. So I think we need a video. I really like that. But anyway, today I'm going to talk about analytics and the changing art of news delivery. Second part of it's kind of purposely vague because delivery, very traditionally, you think of it like physically delivering the paper, and that's still a big part of most of our business models. But there's this new sense of delivery, right? So the old news cycle is getting replaced by a newer one that's more online. It has to do with how traffic flows and how it comes in during the day, and kind of coming up with a strategy that, for media organizations, comes down to coming up with a strategy for capturing that traffic. So first of all, I want to start off with a poll. I'm going to ask you to get your phones out real quick. So here's how this works. You want to text the Georgia's 2015 and to 22333, and then just send in your answers to the questions, and we'll see what you guys are currently doing. The question is, what analytics services are you currently using for your publication? How do you track what's going on? So yeah, what comes up. Slash, let's see if something comes up. Google is winning. Google is continuing. Wow. All right, so first takeaway is we should all invest in Google right now. The second is that it's actually interesting. I was talking to one of these other conferences, people who were from Dow Jones, and they were discussing what just came up. Yeah, and they were talking about how there's like this. They spend a lot of money to get software in-house. I'm gonna stop this before anything too bad comes up. Actually, I'm not sure how to do that, so just behave yourselves. But there's a lot of these older legacy media organizations that are using very expensive software to track these things and try to figure out who their readers are. And for us, it just comes down to Google, it comes down to Jetpack, these free services that can tell you a whole lot about who's reading your publication, at what times. And it's really incredible how much you can get on your readers, and it completely changes the landscape of how you want to create content, how you interact with editors, how stories get put out on social media. So I'm going to go back a second to the more traditional news cycle, and I imagine many of you have variations on this, but there's a big division in the newsroom as to skill sets. So you have your creators, those are your photographers, writers. You have section editors that normally deal directly with those people, copy designers, senior editors, printing delivery crew, and you're working towards this deadline, right? And this is kind of the impetus that, I know for the Heights especially, this is what drives us to get stories done. You're working towards the deadline, and that's pretty much how most editors think. And now you have this new digital landscape comes around, and suddenly, which is kind of born out of bloggers, it's a completely different business model where you have your creators who actually might be your editors too, and you want to have some quality control, but there's a sort of a collapse of the business model where you're just out there throwing stuff at the giant earth that's below you and hoping it sticks. So that's kind of why this is going to be my segue into analytics, sort of understanding this vast space, because when you were dealing with just this end deadline, it's very easy to understand, like, okay, it's the person in the dining hall is picking this up. They're probably drinking their coffee, going to class. Much tougher with this, like, who is this? Like, who are we writing this for? And to kind of go into a little bit of a quick case analysis, it's been mentioned a lot of times throughout this conference. So BuzzFeed. I was actually rephrased this question several times. So at first it was, why is BuzzFeed winning? And then it was, is BuzzFeed winning? And then how is BuzzFeed winning? And I'm actually interested to get some of your responses. I think how I was just opens it up, so maybe there's some things they do well, some things they don't. Do any of you who read BuzzFeed have any feelings of what the organization does well? Yes.
They are really good at clickbait.
Yes. Although the BuzzFeed people will say it's not clickbait, they'll say that they distinguish themselves from clickbait because they say that there's an expectation gap in clickbait. So the idea is like if it's like a classic example is like, look at this three-legged man, and you click on it, it's just a guy with a crutch, and you're like, oh, okay, it's not actually a three-legged man. And that's the typical, that's how they define clickbait, but it's very true, they come up with a way that gets you in. Any other ideas?
Well, that kind of same thing. I feel like they have articles that draw you in originally, like clickbait,
Mhm.
and then from that they expect you to go to their more serious news articles.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually the other interesting trend in BuzzFeed is they started off where they were much more just like Quizlets, puppies, that type of thing, and they're getting more into the serious side of things. And I think there's a weird reverse trend right now where you have your more legacy organizations that are trying to recreate the online business model. So they're at this and they're trying to come up with a way to make themselves look more like this. And these guys are trying to get back to this where they're trying to recreate some of the things that people liked in older media organizations. Any other ideas?
They have articles that people want to share with like their friends.
Yeah, that's huge. And like with the Heights, to speak to a point that was made earlier about how like you kind of have to pimp your content now. It's really all about whether it gets on Facebook, at least at a collegiate level. I think something for the Heights, something like 70% of our traffic comes in through Facebook. And it just goes up exponentially for an individual story if someone's friend shares it. That's one thing that I've really noticed. And it's because it's essentially an endorsement. Like if I just see a link, that's being put out by the Heights, I'm not going to necessarily click on it. I probably will because I'm editor-in-chief, but most people wouldn't do that. But when you see your friend pitch it to you, it gets much more attractive. Any other ideas? Maybe one more. All right. Yeah, so that's kind of what I think for the Heights that I really try to focus on as editor-in-chief is like, who's on the other end? And I think that's what BuzzFeed answered that a lot of other people weren't answering when they first came around. They really, really thought about the user experience first. So like, very directly, they're like, let's try to understand this person. Let's try to figure out what their interests are, what images will attract them, what headlines will attract them. And it's just this whole business model where it used to be like you created your content, and then you say, okay, who's our audience? And now it's, you try to figure out who your audience is, and you kind of create content for them, which is problematic in some sense, but it's also, can be very positive. So I'm going to move on. This is, for the Heights at least, this is generally what our new news cycle works. I mean, our print cycle is on Mondays and Thursdays. That's when the print goes out, and you can see whether people pick up the issues or not, and that's pretty much your gauge of like how successful it was. But with online, you get these analytics that can tell you what time of day people are reading, how they're getting to it. You can click on an individual story. This is I generally use Jetpack, the WordPress built-in software. You can see like where in the world they're coming from. It tells you gender. I'm some disbelieving of gender and age just because I think a lot of times laptops are in people's parents' names, and I don't know, some of that stuff, like right now our analytics show that it's much more older people reading our newspaper, which I somehow don't believe. I think like the median age is like 32, which maybe there's just some really old people looking at it, which skew it. But I think one of my biggest goals as editor-in-chief was how to adjust to this news cycle. So you're so used to having print deadlines twice a week, or for some of you 5 times a week, or every other week, or once a week. But that was pretty much the driving force, and everything kind of followed after that. So how do you match up with this cycle? So normally when people are delivering content, it's right around this part of the day. So things start getting published around 7 p.m., sometimes up to 3 a.m. And that's really when people aren't looking at it. There's a big lag between when the news is happening, when people are looking at it, and when it's getting online. So one of the initiatives that I did was just flipping around the newsroom. So rather than, maybe this is like incredibly antiquated and you'll be surprised that we did it. All our editing, other than the section editors, would happen on the page itself. So you just pass around this paper and you write all your changes on it, which really didn't make, you still have to do that, especially when you're coming out with a print product because imperfections are really bad, but that was something that it was all on that, and it kind of stopped us from making big structural changes, and it also meant that things were getting put online at the end of the night rather than early in the night. So what I do now is rather than doing all my reading at the end when I get like the little pages, I actually do it through Google Docs hopefully around noon. Sometimes that gets pushed and you have deadline stories later in the day. But adjusting the workflow in the newsroom so it's more around this early afternoon type cycle when you still have traffic and you have a chance to deliver on that day. It sort of evens out your numbers throughout the week. So rather than it just all being a spike on Thursday, you'll see a little more on Wednesday. We publish on Thursday. And the same thing, Sunday's a little tougher because you don't really have big weekend readers, but I think this is the big question. Also when it comes to introducing content, this is the way that I like to think about it. And this kind of relates back to the BuzzFeed example. So you have your dead zone at the middle of the night. Like you might have some people in other parts of the world that are strangely looking at your college newspaper, but for the most part, you don't get much traffic that time of day. And then there's the discovery period, and this is when different things that get deliver the news to people are really important. So social media, newsletters, word of mouth. It's really this discovery period, and this is when the BuzzFeed headline effect comes into play, where it's really about trying to capture people and bring them in, and you can do it with false promises, or you can try to write headlines that are more attractive and signal something that really is going to mean a lot to the person who's encountering the story. So that's the time of day when you want to optimize there. And so that's kind of the bad news in a way, because that's, you're throwing out these headlines and hoping that you can capture people's attention, and maybe the quality goes down or the types of things you're writing about diverts. So it's more about like, I don't know, flashy subjects, not necessarily what's going on. But I think this discussion, I call it the discussion period, this is sort of afternoon, and depending on how engaging your content is, it really like can spread out through even like midnight. You might still have people talking about it. This is like once it's already been delivered, right? So you delivered in a more traditional sense that the news has probably gotten to a lot of the people that it's supposed to get to. But this is the time when the comments really come alive. You can see people interacting with it more, tweeting back and forth. It's really about engaging the community, especially in college. It's a much smaller community than a lot of bigger media organizations are working for. And this discussion period is just critical for bringing people in. Also in terms of traffic, like the big headlines might draw people in during discovery, but discussion, getting people to keep talking about it is huge. And I think when we talk about the BuzzFeedification of media sources, it's sort of depressing on if you just think in terms of headlines, but I think ultimately we're finding out more about our audiences, delivering better to them, and telling them more things that relate to their lives, and ultimately that's a great thing. I'm just going to end with this quote actually by a marketing person, not a journalist. So make of that what you will. This was Arthur Nielsen, and a lot of people say he was the founder of analytics, and essentially what he was about was back in the day it would be like people leaving a store, so they bought like some perfume, and he'd be like, he wouldn't personally do it, his employees would be like, so what do you think about it? And they begin to understand the people going out of it. And I think we're at a time, especially with the Heights, this is one of my biggest goals, is to try to understand our readers and their habits. So this is an interesting person to look at, and it says the price of light is a lot less than the cost of darkness, and that's how I think about this content revolution, where suddenly you understand your readers. It's getting a little more like BuzzFeed, but I also think it's a huge opportunity, especially for young media organizations.
Thanks, John.